Hey y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey guys, Bud Elliott here, and welcome back for another edition of Cover 3 Summer School. And today we're going to go to the desert. We're going to talk a little Sun Devils. That's right, Arizona State, with Chris Karpman of SunDevilSource. Chris, welcome to summer school.
Hey, Bud. Good to be with you, man.
Man, I am maybe a little Schadenfreude, but I'm excited to do this one. I got a little preview after we stopped recording with Jacob Rudner back doing the Florida episode. He obviously used to work at SunDevilSource, now on our Gators site. I'm just fascinated by this Arizona State team. I mean, they go 8-5 last year. I remember being at a mega camp or satellite camp last summer with some of the guys on Arizona State's coaching staff, and they were really excited about how well they were recruiting, and things just seem to have gone very, very differently since that point over the last 12 months. I don't really know where to start. What is it like covering this team?
Yeah, really, the height of kind of the Herm Edwards era at ASU was really just before news broke with the NCAA recruiting scandal, which was last June. It was basically a year ago, almost exactly. They were in on a lot of really high-profile guys. They had commits from 4-star recruits in different parts of the country, including multiple in Florida. And they really felt like they were rolling. And, effectively what happened was people who either were currently at the time working or had previously worked for ASU decided that they were they were unhappy with some of the things that went down at ASU, and they were going to alert the NCAA and ASU compliance to some improprieties within the program's recruiting efforts that were ongoing during the pandemic. And it was just like someone sucked all the air out of the room, like in an instant. And we've still sort of been dealing with the repercussions of that, but there's no oxygen even really now when you look at it. And this is a program that has supremely struggled in recruiting, staffing issues. They lost half their coaches as a result of this, directly or indirectly. And then even you look at right now, they're last in 2023 recruiting rankings with one commit. It's a 4-star quarterback, which is good, but there's not a lot of sort of energy or momentum or any of those things. And when you reflect back on the 8-win season that you mentioned there, Bud, really that was kind of a disappointment for ASU. It was probably better set up than any time that I've been around the program, which goes back really more than a quarter century, where they had an opportunity to be a 10-win or better type of a team. They turned the ball over 3 times in a row to start their loss against Washington State at home. They led by multiple touchdowns at Utah on the road before falling apart and giving up 28 straight unanswered points. Those were just 2 very eminently winnable games. They blew BYU on the road, about as bad as I've ever seen it. Team in terms of how many penalties and procedural mistakes and whatnot. So 8-win season, I think a lot of people around the country probably look at that and say, well, ASU had a pretty good year, but not when you consider that USC was down, Washington, Stanford being what they were, and UCLA was decent, but a totally team that ASU was as good or better than. ASU had the most Pac-12 most players of any Pac-12 team in the NFL Combine, which was an indication of how much talent and experience that they really had. But to have the transition be so abrupt and so stark, I've never covered anything really like it.
Yeah, well, we'll start there. Offensively last year, I had them power rated as a top 30 level offense. Obviously, they did make some critical errors at some really inopportune times. QB Jaden Daniels has transferred out to LSU. Paul Tyson, who's the grandson, I think, of
great grandson.
Great grandson. There we go. Of course. Yeah, that would be That'd be pretty wild if he's a grandson. Obviously from Alabama. Are you projecting him to be the starter? What's the outlook at the quarterback position?
Yeah, so Emory Jones transferred in after the spring, wasn't around for their practices, and the passing situation looked really bad in spring ball. Between Trenton Bourget and Paul Tyson, I think it was kind of a battle between them, but neither one of them really looked particularly ready to play in the Pac-12. Emory Jones, I think, is definitely their most important addition that they've had in the off season. Guy who started at Florida, wasn't particularly good necessarily. Had 12 or 13 interceptions, and but he's dynamic athletically, probably the best athlete that ASU's ever had at the position. And the Sun Devils, they had 5 wide receivers transfer out, right? Which that's not good when they only added 1, right? So they just don't really have much in the way of any sort of established guys to throw the ball to. But Emory Jones's ability to make plays with his feet, I think that provides a different kind of a dynamic that I think probably will be could be worth a win or two for a team that has lost so much of its talent via the transfer portal and graduation.
And I cannot believe I didn't put Emory Jones on my questions list. That's it's a little bit embarrassing, but I did see him quite a bit. Obviously he was from Heard County, I think, in Georgia, and played for Florida. I saw him quite a bit as a recruit. Like he's like a thick dude. If you need to run him, 125 times, I think he's somebody who can take the pounding for sure, and pretty athletic. Obviously, Dan Mullen's offense notable when he was at UF for mobile quarterbacks. So a guy who could take the pounding. If I'm reading you right, what receivers do you expect to start for this team? I don't mean that in like a sarcastic way. I just like the depth chart looks pretty ravaged here. Who do you think actually is their 2? I assume they're not going to run out like a lot of 3 or 4 wide sets here, given the numbers. But are there 2 in your mind who are going to start?
Yeah, they will play a lot of 2 tight end looks with their new offensive coordinator, Glenn Thomas. They worked on a lot of that 12 personnel stuff in spring ball. They added Cam Johnson from Vanderbilt, who was a pretty solid slot receiver, not a great athlete, but somebody who's played a lot and been reasonably productive. I think he'll be probably the H. He wasn't with the team in spring ball. They have Brian Thompson, who transferred from Utah, kind of a home run threat, but hasn't really developed into rounding out his game a lot more than that. He'll play either X or Z. And then Elijah Badger's a really great athlete who has been sort of limited by his understanding of the playbook and ability to kind of execute what's asked of him. But he's had a high number of touchdowns per overall touch and really even overall rep on the field. And they've been trying to accelerate his development by pretty much working him exclusively with the first team into the boundary in spring ball. So I think those are really the 3 guys.
Nice. I obviously, I don't even know how to say this kid's name. I always saw him in the stat sheet a lot at Wyoming. Valladay is still there, correct? I knew he transferred in. He didn't leave.
Yeah, Xavier Valladay. He's going to be there probably lion's share of their carries. They do have Daniel Ngata, who is a great athlete as well, and somebody who was behind 2 really dynamic players, and Rashad White, everybody knows about, and Damonte Trainin, who transferred to Ohio State, was really a man as a freshman, 225 pounds. Kind of surprised to see him end up going to play linebacker, given that I think that he had NFL upside as a running back, maybe just longevity concerns for his career. But Valladay really the most productive running back in the Mountain West over the last 3 years. And he's not like a higher end athlete in the Power 5, but really great vision, feel, contact balance, catches the ball out of the backfield. And I think that he's a good sort of pairing with Ngata, who's more of a space athlete type of a guy. So I think ASU will be pretty good in the backfield still, even for how much that they've lost. If their blocking is able to sort of enable that to still be, their bread and butter, which there's some questions about that after losing 3 offensive line starters, including 2 guys who are going to play at the next level.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that next, Chris. So they lose what 4 of their top 6 by snap count, but you do bring in Chris Martinez, who was pretty decorated at San Diego State. I assume in the transfer portal he'll be a starter or at least a key reserve.
Yeah, pretty confident he'll be at right guard. He was battling Spencer Lovell, who transferred to Cal at that position in spring ball. There's a good chance that Des Holmes, who was one
Penn
of the
State
top
kid?
one of the top backups there, he's got a good chance to start at right tackle. And they actually added a Division II transfer, Emmett Boley from Northern State, a kid who played 9-man football in high school, and he's still kind of early in his development. He's battling at left tackle, which I think that's one of their bigger question marks. They do have a young player, Isaiah Glass, who has a chance, I think, to be an all-conference guy down the line. I'm not sure if he's really quite ready yet to play at a high level, but I think he's definitely one of their more promising guys. And they've reconfigured a little bit. Ben Scott has been their right tackle. He's going to probably play center. Ladarius Henderson's their best offensive lineman at left guard. He's got 3 years basically of starter experience.
So running back, even though they lost important guys, that there's some chance they can avoid a massive drop off. QB, I guess we'll see. Receiver, no chance that they're better than they were last year. I would assume. Offensive line, you think they can hold serve here, or is there any chance they're actually better?
I don't think they'll be better. I think the best case would be comparable to last year. They could be slightly worse, maybe even than last year, I would say. And then tight end, they lost Curtis Hodges, who was a pretty good player by the time he graduated. Messiah Swinson's a Missouri transfer, mostly been a backup and a blocker. They have Jalen Conyers, who's a really good athlete, carries a lot of size, 255 pounds. I think he's starting to understand what's needed at that position from a full service standpoint. So I think they could be kind of similar at tight end. And I think you're on the right sort of track there. Jaden Daniels had a bad year. They're probably not going to be a lot worse at quarterback, but I don't think they're going to be better. Receiver, they won't be as good. Running back, they won't be as good, but they could still be serviceable. Offensive line will be close. And tight end also maybe a little bit close. I don't think overall ASU's offense will be as good as last year, especially when you got a new coordinator coming in and you're trying to learn a lot of that stuff schematically and get it all installed, and you have a bunch of new moving pieces with your personnel.
For sure. Switching over to the defense side of the ball, I mean, I had a similar rating on them that I did the offense, and there's a lot of guys gone on this side as well. I think more to the draft than to transfer, although certainly a couple transfers out as well. DJ Davidson has gone up front. Tyler Johnson's gone up front. I know Shannon Foreman wasn't necessarily a starter, but he played, 350 snaps last year. And they also lost the kid that Louisville's excited about, Jermaine
Lole, right?
Are they feeling okay here? They do get Nesta Jade Silvera from Miami, obviously, who was a pretty highly rated recruit and at times was good for the Canes.
Yeah, so actually, I think Robert Rodriguez, their defensive line coach, is as good as any that I have personally watched at identifying and then developing players. Former Minnesota Vikings defensive line assistant coach, and he has done a very good job of both stockpiling talent and finding under the radar guys. So they should still be actually quite good. Surprisingly, somehow with all that they're losing. Omar Norman Lott's a good 3-technique tackle. BJ Green was a walk-on who led the team in sacks last year as a freshman, which is really hard to do. TJ Pesafea as a nose tackle. He's played a lot over the last couple of seasons, and he'll probably be pretty solid behind Silvera. Their ends are going to be very solid. They lost Trevez Moore to an ACL at the beginning of last year. He was a starter at the outset as an LSU transferred end, even ahead of Tyler Johnson, who was a first-team all Pac-12 player. Michael Matus is one of their better guys. I thought Anthony Cooper as a defensive end was among their most improved players on the team last year. And then they have Garen Stansbury, who was probably one of the most underranked guys that signed in the Pac-12 last year. I think he was ranked in the 800s nationally. He's got a good chance to be a mid-round NFL draft pick, I think, if he develops the way that I anticipate. 6'5", 240 pounds now. athletic, long, has some good feel as a pass rusher. So somehow the defensive line could still end up being one of the strengths of the team.
I mean, that would be absolutely huge if they can force teams, to the air, or perhaps if they can help out that secondary by not having to bring quite so many guys into the box against the run. They do lose Butler, and obviously Eric Gentry was one of the hot names in the portal for his ability to get after the quarterback. But the two guys who played the most snaps, unless I missed something, are back, right? Merlin and Soel.
Yeah. Merlin Robertson, I don't think anybody expected that he would still be in college after he was a freshman All-American and a really high-profile guy, but he didn't really develop and improve from a sort of in his ability to decipher what opponents were trying to do on a down and distance basis and kind of be moving and reacting ahead of the curve. Kyle Soley's a captain. He's a very steady, solid guy who can play different positions. He's not going to wow you with his athleticism, but he's as good of a leader as they have really on their defense, and one of their most experienced guys. The Gentry loss was huge. That was somebody that I think pretty clearly established himself as ASU's best freshman overall last year. Really from the start of spring ball, you just could tell that he was a different kind of a guy. Someone else who was also really significantly underrated as a recruit. I think he was the number 777 overall prospect in the country. And I first week I was like, this guy is a first or second round potential guy. So understandably why USC went after him and other schools were kind of hot on him. So after those first two guys, though, Robertson and Soley, there are some questions about kind of who's next in that pecking order after Butler and departed, and with that key transfer. They do have some guys that have been there for a couple of years now that look like they're solid kind of at least backups. Kayla McCullough has taken, I think, a pretty big step in the last few months after kind of an underwhelming season last year. And then Kyle Soley's brother, Connor Soley, is actually one of their better athletes. So there's a chance that both of those guys will be on the field quite a bit together, which I'm interested in seeing.
So it's interesting you bring up these guys who were very good as true freshmen. I kind of have the opinion that 2021 recruiting rankings, and while I'm confident 24/7 Sports will still be the most accurate when we measure 3 years from now, just because I know the size of the staff we have and the investment that we put into it, but that was the COVID year, right? Where you weren't able to get out and just compare, this player against that player in person, or if you did, it was very, very limited reps. And Gentry was a Pennsylvania kid, if I recall. I mean,
Philly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, did they even play a full season of ball? Like, I'm trying to remember, like certain areas of the country started at very different times. So, like, I think that's why we're seeing, maybe not in Arizona State's case because the coaching uncertainty, but I think across the country we're seeing some really elevated transfer rates out of that class. It's almost like blind dating in a way, right? It's like, you showed up on campus. Wait, you're this size? Actually, we thought you were this. We never got to see you in person.
No doubt. Combination of just not being able to get out and get eyes on guys in spring and summer situations when you normally are, and then more limited film and right. to go off of. A lot of times guys played no games or just only a few games, and then you had all these other circumstances and that you could put on top of that in terms of access to weight rooms and nutritional realities. And I think it just made for what was by far the most difficult evaluation year, not just for 24/7, but for colleges themselves. And that's why you probably had a bunch of guys who were outperformed their rankings quite significantly, or maybe some guys that were artificially too high or that others kind of passed them over the last year and a half.
100%. So obviously everybody's worried about receiver. I think justifiably so, given what you told me. I'm kind of worried about the secondary here. They lost 4 out of their top 5 guys by snap count, and they also lost a guy who I live in Orlando here, so I got to see Tommy Hill quite a bit even during the COVID year. I thought that the guy had some real potential and was pretty high on him as a recruit. Am I wrong to think this secondary could be in trouble?
No, that's actually after wide receiver and I think probably secondary is their biggest question mark. Cornerback, I would say in particular, and the reason for that is because Corey Bethley was maybe Hawaii's best player over the last couple of years, and he's a safety transfer. And Chris Edmonds is a guy from Samford who has maybe been their surprise transfer addition. He's big and athletic and physical, and he seems to have a pretty good feel for the position. So, and then they do return Kewan Markham, who was, ostensibly like a third starter for them because Evan Fields was hurt so much last season, and they needed somebody else to play a lot. And so I think safety, they should be maybe close to as good or maybe even potentially better if those guys really work out, the transfers. But corner, absolutely. Jack Jones and Chase Lucas, those guys started as much as any duo in the Pac-12, if not the country, over the last several years, and very talented, both drafted. And so I think they need to get a lot more out of Tamarcus Davis, who actually is athletically maybe even superior to those guys, but he just hasn't been consistent. I thought that in 2020, ASU played 4 games and he looked like he was as good as those other two, but then he kind of dropped off in 2021 for reasons couldn't really put my finger on. But he has a 40-inch vertical, 6 foot, 180, long arms, jump out the gym type of a guy. He's twitchier than Chase Lucas, bigger size than Jack Jones. So they need to really get a lot out of him. And then they've added a couple other transfers. Tark Luckett is a guy that I think he's played at this level, and then he kind of dropped down, and then so they have, and then Jordan Clark and Mason Williams, they played a decent amount the last couple of years at ASU, and they've been more slot guys, nickel corner roles, but they need to kind of elevate as well, and or others. Keon Markham, the brother of Kewan Markham, has plenty of size and athleticism, but consistency has been an issue with him, and pretty similar actually with Ed Woods.
And it's not like any team in ASU's own division brought in like the Blitnikoff winner or anything like that. So corners are certainly not important. Yeah. Okay. The last one position wise here, and we're speaking of Chris Karpman of SunDevilSource. I had Arizona State as like one of the worst field goal value teams last year. And I think part of this is because they do play slower, so they don't get quite as many drives. And so when you have drives where they, like the analytics say they should go for it, and then Herm's a little more old school, so he kicks more often than I think maybe is optimal. And then they didn't make a lot of those field goals. Is Zendejas back? Is he the guy? He was certainly better than Logan Tyler was. I don't even know why Logan Tyler was kicking. Maybe Zendejas got hurt or something like that. But
yeah, there was Zendejas was kind of on and off the roster due to some disagreements about how he was being utilized or managed, an injury that he had previously, and it put them in a little bit of a conundrum. And then they lost one of their better walk-ons who had a chance to also service that role. Now they have Jace Feely, who's the son of Jay Feely, former NFL kicker, who walked on, and last fall he didn't look like he was anywhere close to ready, but then this spring he was dramatically better in their spring game. I think he made 6 out of 7 field goals or something like that, including several from beyond 40 yards. And so I think there's a pretty good chance that he ends up getting the job. The other possibility that they've looked at is Eddie Chaplitsky, who was their punter last year as a true freshman. He also was a very good field goal kicker in high school, and in practices looked like he was capable of being a pretty solid kicker as well. So I think that he's another candidate that they have. So I think there's going to be an open competition, though, really. Carter Brown is a guy that they're adding to this class who was really talented out of the high school ranks. So I'm not sure, but out of those 3, I think there is a reasonably good chance to end up better than they were last year, because I totally agree with you. Logan Tyler was just absolutely not the answer.
Yeah, I obviously covered Logan at Florida State, and it was
not
entirely surprising on the kicking avenue there. Chris, Vegas books have a variety of over/under win totals already out for Arizona State. I saw a 7.5 early and did grab the under on that before that moved. I thought that was maybe a little misguided. Won't name the book because it's not the one that sponsors 24/7 Sports. But right now I'm seeing a lot of like 6.5s, 5.5s. I feel like the schedule's kind of easy if this can be a top 50 level team. But if this is more like a top 80 level team, then the schedule is actually kind of tricky. Does that seem fair?
Yeah. Well, the schedule is definitely harder than last year.
Yeah.
Not even close. And I also saw some of those 7 to 7.5 early numbers, and that was kind of before some of the transfers and other fallout. But even watching this team in, let's say, late March in spring ball, I was saying 6 wins, 6.5 really should have been the over under then. Now, uh, gaining Emory Jones does sort of prove as a counterbalance to losing some of these other guys. I think that's meaningful. But if ASU wins more than 7 games this year, especially with Herm Edwards being in the position that he's in, and all the turmoil that's gone on in their staff situation, I would consider that to be quite a surprising outcome. I think 8 wins is highly improbable after how set up that the team had it last year to only get to 8 wins. I just think that it's pretty unlikely. I'd be actually, I think it's much more likely that they do not make a bowl or they do not become bowl eligible than they win 8 games. So I would say 5 or 6, maybe 7 as sort of the higher end. I would also be pretty surprised if they ended up like a 4-win team. That just given that they have 2 sort of gimme games that are baked into their non-conference.
For sure. And I mean, Arizona could even be much better than they were last year. And yet I still project Arizona State as a favorite in that one. Like they have a long way to go to get, to anywhere like to even average. So Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time today, man. This is a roster that has befuddled me, and I feel like I learned a lot. And I do read a lot of SunDevilSource stuff. I think you guys kill it in the video game. And if y'all are an Arizona State fan out there, really encourage you to check them out. They do a great job. They cover the team in a real professional manner. I mean, even when things are maybe not the best right now with football, baseball, basketball, like the trio. I've been reading the best report. Like, oh my gosh, they need a break out there in the desert. At least the weather's nice, and things will turn around.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Bud. We just plug along. You do what you do, right?
No doubt about it. All right, man. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see you all soon.